Welcome everyone to IA Strategy Week and our AI at IA panel forum talking about artificial intelligence and its impact on our workplace and ourselves and our industry. We've got a very cool and diverse group of folks, and I'm pretty excited to hear the conversation. And actually, to kick it off, I'd like to pass it on to introduce yourselves and say a little bit about your role and why in the world you said yes to an AI conversation at a design firm.
My name is Reagan Donoghue. I am with Newmark Knight Frank, and I have been working in the workplace strategy team where we help sort of change the conversation with our clients and help them to actually realize that there are human beings moving into a space and not to just select a real estate entity based upon, the right price or the right location. And so it's been quite a whirlwind. And with artificial intelligence coming and playing a role, if you think about what a real estate person is, it's all about the market, it's all about the data. So now we sort of need to understand what our new role is moving forward with artificial intelligence coming and playing in the game.
Great.
All right, my name is Kiely. I'm an application engineer with Analog Devices. And we make semiconductors and microchips. A lot of what we've seen is interfacing with the sensors that people use for smart buildings, IoT, all that kind of stuff. And so we focus on the hardware side of things. But the more that we engage with our customers, we're starting to see that they're asking us to provide them with algorithms, teach them about machine learning or AI, and how to interface those types of systems with our hardware. I was asked by Mary and Chris to join and attend here today, so I said, why not?
The perfect guest.
Yeah.
My name is Serriere. I'm with a company called Teecom, and we design technology infrastructure for buildings. So we work with architects and owners and consult around their technology needs and how technology systems can ultimately support their business. We're super excited about artificial intelligence and machine learning and the way that it's requiring us to gather more and more data from all of these technology systems. And our role is to understand how we can help our clients harness that data and ultimately apply it to design better facilities. That's actually one of the areas that we're also excited about, is on the design side, harnessing machine learning and artificial intelligence to improve the work that we do and make it easier and faster and more accurate in terms of our output. So lots of potential there with machine learning and artificial intelligence within our industry. And I'm just here because I'm excited about artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Aymee Coget, and I'm the CEO and founder of Happiness for HumanKInd. Yay! And we are building AI products to help increase well-being, and I also help the IEEE from a standard perspective for AI and well-being, and also corporate integration with that standard, as well as the ethics committee in the AI well-being area in IEEE as well. And my background is in organizational psychology with an emphasis in leadership and positive psychology. So I've been thinking about employee happiness from pretty much every single aspect you can think of for about 23 years. And so I'm happy to participate in this conversation as AI is becoming bigger and bigger in our day-to-day life and definitely in our workplace. And I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. So I think in hearing from your different perspectives, one thing I'm curious to hear your thoughts on is more and more AI is being used in decision-making and facilitating decision-making. And I think both the structure of that and the implications of that are still being sussed out and are fairly interesting. I wonder if one of you could talk about your input on that.
Well, I guess I'll start because I'm conveniently right next to you. So working with a lot of CEOs and CFOs when they're making a very critical decision on real estate and should they stay, should they go, what should they do with their space. It actually is kind of fascinating because a lot of times, especially in this new era of data, everyone's leaning in really hard on the data, and every time we provide them with that content and the statistics and the information and the knowledge, they're still completely stuck sometimes, because what I think humans don't realize is that we actually need our emotions as well as our rational thinking to make a sound decision. And there's actually a fascinating book called How We Decide, and it talks about that, where if you don't learn how to connect, the human emotion, which is actually an older part of our brain, and it's been around since, our survival, and that's how we have, in the past, we would make decisions like, fight or flight. If you see a big bear and it's coming at you, you're either going to fight it or you're going to run away super fast. Well, that's not something you sit down and look at the numbers and analyze and decide, does it logically make sense that I should take this bear on, or, what are my statistics? Your brain just automatically responds. And so Jack Welch actually wrote a book, From the Gut, and it talks about that too, where decisions need to be based upon your intuition as well as backed up with the data. So that's why I think it's making a very impactful role where we can use AI with regards to all of the data and all of the information that it can create for us. But at the end of the day, the human decision-making piece plays in heavily.
That's interesting. And Aymee, as your company includes the word human, how do you make sure that human touch is part of the AI world?
Well, it's actually very interesting. There's a company called Affectiva. I'm uncertain if you are aware of this, but they can actually measure the facial recognition cameras can measure like 600,000 different types of emotions on your face to be able to recognize what you're doing. And places like Nike are utilizing it to watch their consumers during the Copernic commercials, as well as in self-driving cars and things like this. So we're basically Facebook, basically emotional artificial intelligence is starting to become a bigger thing to talk about.
So that tends to lead to what I would say is our most submitted question, which is, how do we greet our new overlords and what do we do to protect ourselves?
I'm going to take that one, because okay. I don't think that's a risk that we have to worry about for quite some time. I think what we have today are really narrow applications of machine learning. We have all of these examples of like self-driving cars, right? The machine learning algorithms that go into those systems, they're good at one thing. They gather the data required to drive a car, and they drive a car. They can't suddenly figure out how to overcome human emotions or control people. And I think that's one of the things to keep in mind when we look at applying machine learning, is that so much of what we do is actually applying it in a very narrow niche, and that constrains it. So we probably don't have to worry about being worshiping new overloads anytime soon.
Well, that's for sure, because he works in it every single day, and this is based off of the narrow AI perspective. And this, like right now in 2018, if you fast forward into like 20 years from now, though, that it could be very different.
It seems unlikely, given what we know. Sure, on a long enough time scale, but
the Industrial Revolution had a lot of people with the same fears, where they were worried that they were going to lose their jobs. But what ended up happening was there was a lot more jobs created, and people could move into much more jobs that focus on things that machines can't do, that require creativity and kind of out of the box thinking. As we talked about, the narrow AI at the moment is very specifically trained. I'm not really going to be too worried until I can pick up my iPhone and tell Siri how to play checkers or drafts or chess, and they get it straight away just by reading the rules. I mean, today, a 4 or 5-year-old child, you can explain the rules of a game and instantly they get it. It takes thousands and thousands of iterations in supercomputers to have machines learn that and get good at it. So I think, it is far away, but, if it ever comes, I think that we'll find that a lot of the jobs and the boring tasks that we do every day will go away, and we'll find new roles or new things to take on to replace that.
And are any of you seeing the new roles that are rising from that interaction?
There's actually roles I've worked with some tech companies in the last year where they're actually having human beings working with these, supercomputers, where they're trying to teach them about human tone, or they're trying to teach them about human emotion and trying to kind of educate them. And it's sort of these, data scientists, experts that are kind of falling into this realm. But I think to the super, overlord part, it's artificial intelligence. It has been around since the 50s. And it's actually it's weathered 2 winters, and so we're into this 3rd wave, and this is where it's become more real than ever. And right now, they've likened it to a Harvard MBA with 800 years of experience. So And with this machine learning, it's continuously going and on and on and on. And so I think it won't, I think to your point, it won't take forever for it to turn into what they are calling artificial general intelligence, which is the sort of the iRobot, the scary one that can think for itself. And so that's the piece that's missing. But there is this missing link to this decision-making skill. And that's one piece that's actually sort of hampered these driverless cars from taking over the world, because they have about 4 million driverless cars on the road today, and they should have about 10 million within the next year or so, maybe 2 years. And the last 10% of what's really going to have it take over, though, is who writes the algorithm, who sits there and writes this algorithm for the coding that tells that car to save the passenger or hit the person who automatically jumped in front of them. And that's part of that critical decision making that our emotions come into play. And so I think that critical element is where humans need to focus, is our ability to use our emotions to our advantage versus, trying to beat this super smart computer who's already beat us at the Jeopardy game, it's already beat us at AlphaGo, it's already beat us at chess. We're not winning the straight black and white, games, but what we can win is the human race. And I think we might want to start looking into what's our greater purpose.
I think that calls in another interesting factor, which is that the term artificial intelligence is a bit of a misnomer in that it is assigned, right? It's code. It's written by a person with their own set of beliefs and feelings, and that affects both the start case and the development. So I wonder, does anyone have any thoughts about the ethics of AI and how that propagates?
Can we talk about the ethics of parenting as well?
Sure. It's not the title, but this is a free-flowing conversation.
It's just interesting the way that you phrase it, right? And when we think about artificial intelligence, yes, obviously there are human software developers creating these algorithms, excuse me, and these systems. But at the same time, there are all kinds of situations where we allow for the same kind of freedom when it comes to developing these algorithms. And in many ways, it is less about the algorithms and more about the data. And I think that's one of the critical things that we haven't touched on yet, is just how much data present-day machine learning algorithms require. And one of the ways that we've seen bias pop up in our own work with machine learning is really in the data sets that we're providing the machine learning systems. And that's the tricky part. So I think the highest profile example of this was where we were doing facial recognition, and it was biased towards Caucasians. And of course, what turned out to be the case was that the data set that they were using to train the algorithm was heavily Caucasian. And those are the kinds of ways that bias gets introduced. It's less about the programmer writing something that is maliciously biased and more about the kind of data that the algorithm is exposed to. And that's why I bring up the parenting example, because it's like, well, what are you exposing your kids to? That ultimately influences, in some way, their behavior, as much as you can try and program them by directing them to have specific responses. Ultimately, there's an enormous amount of data that they have to acquire. And it's the same thing with our machine learning, our current approach to machine learning.
So you struck a chord with me because I'm a parent in a good way. I actually read this book, The Culture Code of Parenting, and it talks to that, where it says, if you think about, they compared it to, there's a Swedish child and a child in Japan, and how the child in Japan back in the day learned the life of the samurai. And the life of the samurai was, there is, honor in dying in battle, whereas the Swedish child, there's honor in making really good cheese, and it's delicious. And so it's sort of like, it's bizarre, but we're all human beings, but yet the culture is what truly defined these two humans, and the opposite ends of the world. And so it is funny to think about what is the culture and what is the cognitive bias that's happening with the coders, when they're writing this code. Like, who are these people doing this, and should we bring more diversity into that part of it?
Yeah, I think that the expectation from computers or code is that it's perfect, and so we hold it to the standard of it has to work perfect every time. That's why we hear questions, and we hear it all the time when we talk about autonomous vehicles at work. People are told, but what about if it's a grandmother and a pregnant woman and a child? Which one do you pick? And you're kind of saying, well, that's a specific scenario, and they choose a pregnant woman and a grandmother and a child to try and tug at your emotions and try and get that human factor of it. But as an engineer, I look at it and I go, well, I don't really mind, because I know that in the bigger picture, the vehicles will be better at driving than humans. So less people. Yeah, less people.
I think Aymee disagrees.
Right? Less
So
people.
that happened.
Yeah, less people will die. The roads will be a safer place to be. And so the individual scenarios that we pull out to try and get people to say, oh, I'm not really sure. It's kind of like, well, what's the greater good? And that's probably the difference between an engineer and some of the other people.
I think Aymee has something to say.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, first, let's take a step back and realize that artificial intelligence is not something like in the future. It's every day already in your life. It's in your Google, it's in your Fitbit, it's in everything that you do. And so this concept of, artificial intelligence is only written by straight white males who do the code, and then they go into the world, and then the robots forget about the women, and then they kill all the women, the grandmas and the kids, and the pregnant people. And so we have to realize that, yes, those diversity, that STEM problem, the problem with women not being represented in these major decisions is really important. So the idea that I hear an engineer being like, oh yeah, who cares? Let's just kill them all. Then you're like, oh, well, what is the overlord that we're talking about?
No, I heard you say kill them all.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
No, I said.
So I wonder in that case if it's the fact that the decision making is removed from that human factor that's really what's disquieting, and knowing that someone has to write the code that decides on a choice rather than the mushier human decision making.
It's so mushy.
But I think the trouble is that no one is actually writing that code. Like, no one is writing the code that says,
do that.
Run into the grandmother instead of the pregnant lady. Like, that just doesn't happen. I mean, it's something we can imagine, and we have this visceral response to it. But again, based on the way machine learning works, what we're really trying to build is a system that can prevent collisions, and it doesn't recognize grandmothers. It doesn't recognize pregnant ladies. It is simply trying to do its best to navigate through some set of parameters. There is something unsettling about a perfectly rational system meandering through the world like this that doesn't have an emotional connection to any of the things that it encounters. But at the flip side is there's this perfectly rational system driving the car that doesn't get tired, that doesn't get drunk, that doesn't get emotional, and that ultimately we think is a benefit.
So with that in mind, I think one of the interesting questions I've heard is we're developing it so fast because we can. But has there been much stop to think about what is the right application and what maybe isn't the right application? So do you have examples of what you think would not be the right arena for AI? To the panel.
Yeah.
I can answer that. I was in another group, and we were talking about the future of work in AI, and it was brought up that basically I was one of 5 females in a group of 30 males, and so they ultimately decided that we needed to exchange caretakers, nannies, and teachers with robots. And so basically the goal of the future is to replace a lot of these, female-driven jobs that could be like that compassionate, that empathetic, that actual human touch that we particularly need at these specific times of our life. And then what happens? We raise a humankind that is based from, machines. So where is the human touch at that point?
Well, and I actually, have you guys heard of that? There was a nursery in Eastern Europe and in Romania where the babies, there was not enough people to care for them, and so the babies were never picked up. And no one, I think people are shaking their head, you've heard of this. So without that human physical touch and human love and empathy and caring, they actually stopped trying. And so it's coming into more of a thing of, yeah, it probably makes logical sense because, daycare is super expensive. It's ridiculous. It's probably more than our mortgage right now. But, at the end of the day, we pay that money because we love that our children run into their arms, and there's that human connection, and there's that moment that they have, and that's how you grow, and your brain develops in your first 3 years. Your personality for who you're going to be as a human being is formed at 3. So that makes me really scared because my teenager is like crazy and we'll see. She's gonna get a tirade in high school, but either way, and it's all about that human empathy and the human caring for that human being. And I think you'd mentioned too, Aymee, at the end of people's lives, like in hospice, and when people are in the hospitals, and they just some people just stop trying. They stop caring. And if you think about, when a couple, typically if one passes away, the other one dies within a couple weeks. And this actually just happened to my grandparents. My grandmother passed away 3 months ago. My grandfather died a month later. And so if that's not a human connection, I don't know what is. Because, at the end of the day, I think that's one thing that we need to hold on to in this time, is that how important, how critical our connections are, and what it means to be a human, and why, it's so important to be here.
And maybe that's what we'll do when all the machines have taken over the jobs.
Yeah. Thank you for lighting the mood.
Spend time with our families, and we'll connect with the communities, and we become more human, and not just be involved in this rat race.
Well, and that's interesting, because that's actually in our field, one of the things we've noticed as technology has increased, the focus on personal interaction has increased. People come to work together, rather than just work with their landline and their filing cabinet. And so I wonder if there isn't maybe an inverse effect where it actually drives more human interaction.
Absolutely. That is fundamentally one of the things that we are most excited about. Is much of the engineering work that we do fundamentally comes down to drawing lines on floor plans, and that takes an enormous amount of time. And yet, fundamentally, we see ourselves as consultants, and that is all about the human connection, understanding our clients' needs, and reflecting that in some sort of work product. But if we can enlist machines to do the mundane work of drawing the lines, that returns an enormous amount of time to our staff to be able to talk more, to engage more, to better understand the problems, so that we can develop more interesting solutions.
AI is the currency of convenience. And so if you look at your life and you think, where can I get a better, faster experience, whether it's through calendaring or doing your email or monitoring your sleep or whatever, this is where AI comes into your life. If you can move beyond the streams of convenience in your life and into I guess I'll call them higher realms of compassion and love and acceptance and meditation, and think that, all of my mundane things are taken care of, how can I paint better? How can I express myself better? How can I spend more time with my loved ones? Now that I have A, B, and C handled by Finn, what can I do now?
When, there's a group called the Future Society, and they actually have literally said, well, what if this is this great utopian world and we actually don't have to do these mundane things, or maybe what if one day we don't have to have jobs? And then I think the bigger question is, what is the human purpose? And, maybe it's something more about saving the earth, or maybe it's something, we take on more of a social responsibility. And, we sort of need to find our new role in supporting this. I'm a supporter of AI, like I'm saying, some things that are, scary and like make you kind of freak out. But at the end of the day, it's going to push us, like you said, the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it makes me think of John Henry with the steam engine. Have you guys heard that story where John Henry was like the best guy on the railroad, and he could make, the fastest railroad thing, and he could dig it the fastest. And then all of a sudden this guy comes up with the steam engine and basically said, hey, I invented a machine, and this can actually do this, 10 humans faster than anyone. So John Henry said, no, I'm better. I'm going to take this machine on. And so he took him on, and it's, this really great folktale, and he's like fighting, and he's going all night, and, doesn't sleep, doesn't eat, doesn't rest. And after the day is done, he actually beat the machine, and then he fell forward and died. So he won, but it was the wrong race. I think it's a folk tale, so I don't think it was actually a human being. But I think the moral of the story is that we can't go head to head with this, with machine learning, with AI, but we need to learn what is our new role and what do we focus on that makes us superior still. And that's kind of the part that I think we need to start looking towards.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting topic about a blended experience. And I wonder if other panelists have done any investigation or have thoughts on finding that sweet spot.
Cyborgs?
That could be one.
I mean, they call it cognitive, collaboration. They call it augmented intelligence. But essentially, at the end of the day, what it is humans working with machines towards a greater good. And so towards our, next, future, and how do we change that?
Yeah, I mean, the simple example, again, in our industry is being able to have a machine learning system generate something for you, and then you, as the human, can review it. And that alone saves you an enormous amount of time, and ultimately your work is better because you are enlisting the help of the machine. It hasn't replaced you. You're still there to validate that it's solving the right problem. You're still choosing the trade-offs that might be presented to you by the machine. But at the end of the day, the work is better, faster, cheaper, potentially.
Yeah, I wonder, to your earlier comment about the Industrial Revolution, and not to undercut our entire panel, but I wonder if we're just the ones who are worried about it, and that our kids will not even have a second thought and wonder what the heck we all came together today for.
To be clear, I am not worried.
Yeah. And I think of it in the 3 Ps. So there was a lot of piles that's happened in the last century. So we had piles of poop with manure, which is what sort of the Industrial Revolution saved us from with the cars, right? Because at one point there was all these horses going into New York, and they had this magazine that came out and said 9 feet of manure are going to be lining the city in the next 2 years if we don't do something. And then they created the car. And so it sort of took us to the next wave. And then all of a sudden, people are just drowning in the 80s in piles and piles of paper. And people are freaking out going, where are we going to store all this? And there's just not enough space in the office. And next thing we know, the computer comes in and it saves us from that. And so now I feel like we have piles and piles of data. And what do we do with this data? How do we use it? Because we have so much content and so much information that, we're going to get overwhelmed. I mean, when I'm given all this content to synthesize and bring together, it's overwhelming, right? Whereas a machine can spend all that time 24/7, never ending, and come back with, the information that we're craving, that we need, and do all that extra work for us. It can burn the midnight oil, and we can relax, have a glass of wine, wake up, a little bit later the next day and go, oh, look at that, I'm so smart, and I choose A. And I think that's sort of a great thing to look at. So yeah, I think you're right. I think that the children of the future, they'll have their own problems to worry about, whatever those may be, but I don't think it's going to be artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I have to say I agree. I think every generation eventually gets their problem to worry about when they're growing up. They don't care about anything.
We
and they get to some point where they start thinking about, well, what are we going to do about this, and what are we going to do with that? And the 24-hour news cycle that's come in now has people worrying about what's going on all around the world. And people say like, oh, it's getting worse. And you're like, well, no, if you step back and look at the data, things are actually getting better. It's just you're hearing about it more and you think it's worse. But then your kids are going to grow up hearing this and be like, oh, this is normal. And they're not going to worry about that. They're worried about something else. I mean, I'm not worried about, the AI revolution at all. I think it's really exciting. You mentioned about your grandparents before, and both my grandparents ended up in a nursing home. My grandmother passed away last year. My grandfather is there by himself now. And we were worried about this whole, 1-2, right, dying of a broken heart and all that. And he can't get out and get about. He's not mobile, and he's not allowed to drive anymore. They took his license. But if we had self-driving vehicles, he could get around a lot more. People who are not allowed to drive for disabilities, or other reasons, they can get around a lot easier. I think there's a lot of ways in which can drastically improve our lives. And I'm not worried about the machines taking over. I would be more worried about who is it that owns all the machines. Right?
Yeah.
If everyone has their own robot and everyone has their own AI and it's all on your phone, that's fine. But if it's all controlled by a very small group of people, suddenly it does become, well, it's not robot overlords, it's a small group of people overlords.
It's Google, it's Amazon, it's Facebook. Yeah.
Well, and I'm worried about, honestly, quite frankly, how we as humans are using technology. Because it's not social media, in my opinion, it's anti-social media. People stop making human connections. And so my bigger concern with this, next wave of AI is that people are going to become more introverted, spend less time connecting with other people and rely more on artificial things because they're saying, oh, you can do holograms now. Oh, you can, all these different ways of connecting. It makes me think of, I've worked with several companies where all we do is video chat because that's their way of connecting, right? But if you think about an actual video chat, you can't physically look the person in the eyes. Because you have to either look at the video camera part, the lens, so you're looking at that, you're not looking at the human, or you're looking at them and it looks like you're looking down. And so there's this connectivity that's going to be lost if we rely too heavily on this. So I think it's almost like going back to being more authentic and being more, present and around each other more.
Yeah, and I think that brings me to a question I was wondering before. Aymee, your company is Happiness for Humankind, and we've been talking a lot about efficiency and decision making. How does happiness come into the AI conversation?
That's a great question. I'm one of the few positive psychologists who've been able to make that leap into this conversation of machine learning and artificial intelligence and natural language generation, and how do we actually utilize psychology and AI to better ourselves. And our products are helping people to become empowered and also to create a positive mood and increase resiliency in the moment of need. And so the problem right now is that if you are stressed or depressed or anxious, what are you going to do? You're either going to pop your pill, or you're going to call your therapist for the next appointment. You're going to call your friend and complain. You're going to go to the bathroom and splash some water on your face. What are your options? You don't really have a lot of options. Nowadays, we're going to be able to detect stress at an organizational level. So right now there is a tool being researched at Oxford where it's being piloted at the French bank. And what happens is it's a Fitbit type of sensor, and so it tests your stress. And so all the employees, they buy into the Orwellian concept of the French bank that cares about your stress level. And so the day that the Brexit was announced, basically there was an alarm level of the entire organization because everyone's stress went off the chart. So if you're somebody who's monitoring that in like an HR role or something, what are you going to do? And so our AI would be like the red alert. Okay, our AI is called Sunny. So let Sunny out. And so Sunny will be able to detect all of your emotional things from an individual level, because let's say you get stressed, but you get depressed and you get anxious, and maybe you have suicidal thoughts. Sunny will be able to learn about you individually, yet also you'll be able to see at an organizational level or group level, similar like Headspace, you can see what other people who are meditating in the world and things like that. So we'll be able to utilize an AI to be able to help you in the moment of need versus archaic versions of like splashing water on your face or something like that.
That brings an interesting question as far as the different cultural expectations in different societies, and how in the West, for example, the need for privacy might make people concerned with a sensor that their boss knows if they're stressed. Have you done any investigation into that realm? Oh,
absolutely. GDPR is top, and so that's basically our goal. Is always you have to have regulation in that area, and what we're focused on in the IEEE too is to help guide at an organizational or a countrywide level who is interested in gathering that type of data and what they're going to do with it, and the AI instrumentation that they'll build from it, and all of that from a large-scale perspective. So that's all very important, yes.
It's interesting thinking about the cultural level, because it doesn't even have to be like regional. You can just look at the difference in terms of expectations about a workplace versus a home environment, right? And at work, of course, hopefully all of you know, your IT department can read your emails, right? Like, it's just fundamental to the way corporate. I know, right? It's fundamental to the way corporate America works. But if we said, oh yeah, your boss can also read your private emails, we'd be like, whoa, what? That's impossible, right? And so thinking about applications of machine learning in that same way, there are certain places that we go, namely our jobs, where we are much more accepting of being tracked or having a kind of privacy invasion, because we accept that as part of normal work. It's expected, but the same kind of thing would be totally inappropriate in a personal environment like your house. And I think that is something that we definitely need to address. And thinking about all of these different systems, that some of them exist in the workplace, some of them exist at home. I think like Amazon Alexa, or the new Facebook thing that goes in your house and has always on microphones and that kind of thing, that is ultimately feeding a machine learning system. Some of those things we are more accepting of than others. And it's not about our cultural background from a regional perspective. It is just purely expectations management.
Well, also in China, everything is AI run, from the classrooms to the streets to the grocery stores.
They have a new anchorman.
They have a new anchorman that's a robot.
No joke. It's actually this guy. He resembles an anchorman from China. He's reading off the news, and it's totally artificial.
You know, though, I mean, it's interesting, again, like thinking about how we actually interact with artificial intelligence or machine learning on a daily basis. And virtually every website that you go to has some sort of algorithmically generated news feed, right? So, I mean, it's not like the embodiment of a news anchor, but at the same time, an algorithm is deciding what to show you to get the most clicks, to get the most engagement. And it is a kind of artificially intelligent news anchor in a way.
I've decided I should stop looking at those cupcake websites because I'm starting to feel like a fat girl. It's all cupcakes now on Instagram.
Well, and to that point, I mean, if we, kind of look at China and say, well, that's not us. But then I think it was just this last year, 800 articles were authored in the Washington Post by an AI in a way that is very transactional. And at the moment, not a lot of editorializing, but that's happened and it is here. So I think to your other points, this isn't a what's the future going to look like. It's what do we do now. The other point I thought was interesting was talking about data, and when you first mentioned, Rob, about developing the sensors that provides those inputs. Have you seen any of your clients or other compatriots who are asking for those type of tools to gather the data?
Yeah, we kind of switched from, well, not switched from, we added, more capability in terms of going from just interfacing with the sensors alone to actually enabling customers to take that and transmit it up to, be it some kind of edge node that will do some kind of processing and then onto the cloud for further processing, and having an actual full environment in the cloud that allows people to do analysis and extract insights. So there's they talk about phases of first you get the data, and then you turn it into information, and then you turn it into knowledge and wisdom. There's kind of phases, and then finally it becomes action. And when you get the full closed loop, that's when they talk about, okay, now you have intelligence, because it's going from data to action without anybody intervening. And we've started to move and what we call internally is up the stack, trying to provide more solutions that allow customers to just take, one of our boards that has some sensor on the front, and then it hooks up on the back to wirelessly to a network. And so, yeah, it's definitely something we've seen, and it's kind of a general thing. It doesn't specifically apply to any one kind of industry or market segment. It's just across the board. People are trying to figure out. I think for us it was IoT was kind of what kicked it off. People started talking a lot more about that, and we in the beginning we didn't really know what it was. I say, I have this nameplate on my cubicle. If I put a wireless node on it, is it now an IoT nameplate? What makes it IoT? What's the kind of and we struggled with a long time to figure out what that was. But now we have a lot more solutions in that area, and I think people are still the end customers are still trying to figure out what it is that they want to do with it. And to Regan's point, we have all this data, right? So we're talking about piles of things we have. A lot of customers in that stage were, great, we set up our network, we have all these nodes all around the place, lots of sensors, we have all this data. Now what do we do? What's kind of next? And we're at the same point. We're trying to help them understand it, but we're learning at the same time as well.
That is literally the part where we should be talking, because we engage with the executives at that level, and they have to look at this data and make decisions based upon it. Because if there's something that's a very blatantly obvious thing that maybe they didn't even realize, they have to start realizing that maybe their space and their environment's not working in the way that it could be or should be.
Yeah, and the focus is very much as well on, when these executives are looking at it, they're thinking very much about kind of operationalizing the building or operationalize the facility or something that's going on. They say we want to make it cheaper, we want to have preventative maintenance beforehand. It's all about optimizing the current kind of focus. I think a lot of people do that as well. If you talk about smart buildings, right? Given that we're here in an architecture firm, people talk about, well, how can we control the lighting and how can we control the heating and the air quality and all that kind of stuff. But actually that data, if you had, a few years worth of occupancy data on the building, and then you said, well, okay, we've actually done this in 100 buildings. You can take that and say, well, we realize that the building isn't used as we thought it was used. And sure, it might have been run efficiently over the years while we had these networks installed, but we've taken insight from that data and we're going to feed that back to the start of the design and concept phase and say we can design better buildings now. And so people are still stuck in what do we do with it today to make things run better? and they haven't gotten to the, wait, how do we go back to the beginning and look at the full life cycle of the whatever it is, a factory or a plant or a building or whatever, and improve each of the stages on the way through it.
That's teed up for you, Alex. You want to
I didn't even know.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I think it's really exciting because that is exactly what we're looking at. And there's a few challenges there, one of which is just ownership of the data and how you maintain the continuity of that data over the life cycle of a building, right? The technology is changing very quickly, the building not changing as quickly, but then gathering that over the lifetime and then feeding that back into your designs, we think that is very much the future. And you can imagine a situation in the future where IA takes its portfolio of its highest performing buildings, feeds that into a machine learning system, and the machine learning system starts generating floor plan after floor plan after floor plan that aligns with your highest performing designs, all based on the data that you've gathered about those facilities over their entire life cycle. And then, of course, the new designs can gather even more data so that when you go back again and have another cycle, you can generate even better designs. There's a ton of potential there, thinking about like healthcare as an example, where being able to compare high-performing facilities that have better patient outcomes, using that data about how nurses travel or how doctors travel, how much interaction time there is with patients, using all of that data, feeding it into a machine learning algorithm that can correlate that kind of performance with spatial information and just generate floor plans and designs on its own.
I think, too, one of the interesting things I'm seeing is the opportunity not just to create the most optimal for all. I think one of the challenges in buildings is that building codes, and Aymee has the regulatory knows some of this, is that it's meant to be a level and flat regulation, but it doesn't provide opportunity for individual delight and thriving. And that these sensors and environments offer the opportunity to create a space that actually could be thriving and individually tunable. And I wonder if you're seeing any of that with any of your clients.
Certainly, in terms of controlling the space and making spaces more dynamic, that is a constant desire among clients at the outset. And then we tell them how much it's going to cost, and they're like, maybe the basic lighting system is acceptable. We don't need people to be able to individually tune the color temperature of the light fixture over their desks. But I think that is definitely where we're headed. The cost of those kinds of systems continues to come down, and it continues to be higher and higher demand. I mean, that's back to this question of not only understanding the technology trends, but also user expectations about the technology, and recognizing that people expect to be able to change their workplace and have it suit their needs and be delighted by their workplace.
Well, it called to mind potentially with the sensors and the AI you're talking about, Aymee, potentially a building that does it by itself, with some kind of tracking of a person's state of mind, adjusting the environment through an AI. I wonder if that's something you've thought about or something that's come up?
It exists.
Yeah, actually, I think it's still to be created. However, I was just at a transformative tech conference where there was a demonstration of a wireless EEG contraption, I'll call it. It was embedded into a pillow. And so the idea is that in a car, for example, that would be the headrest. And so it's constantly monitoring your brain waves. And so let's say your brain waves are showing fatigue, then it will, through an AI, create or some other sensor or something, be able to shake your seat or to make you become awake, or flash some lights, or something like that, or ultimately guide you off of the freeway, to say, hey, you're tired, time to take a break. And so that would be one example of like, oh, my brain is actually being monitored, and I can tell if, let's say, Sonny is noticing that your brainwave is down and your fatigue is down, then he can tell you a few jokes or help you boost your mood in one way, shape, or form. So ultimately, let's say that's in the employee's chair. And so then you have your stress is being monitored from a brain level from the individual employee perspective. So that would be one. Another is that Fitbit concept that I mentioned before. And there's this other technology that I learned. One of the exciting things in the future I'm seeing is that we're scientists are doing their best to get people off of their iPhone to create other types of instruments like rings or Fitbits or the pillow or things like that. And so the goal is there's something that you can actually, it will like kind of zap you, I guess, and to tell you if you are, need to meditate or if your concentration needs to change. And so just by a signal without anyone else knowing in the room, you can internally change yourself just by this like signal that's happening, similar to like a t-shirt I've seen that like helps you sit up straight. Every time you go like this, you sit up straight. Oh, well, yeah. So,
put the mic in your back and it'll work.
Yeah, so basically what we're using AI is to basically tune in to our internal space like we're C3PO. And so let's say once we start understanding ourselves like C3PO at an individual level, we can also see that at an organizational level because of the data.
I think a Zap alarm to meditate probably still could use a little tweaking, but that's an interesting.
So relaxed.
The idea initially about the monitoring of the stress levels and stuff it did freak me out a little bit. But when I think about it, there's so many people I know who, they get stuck on a problem and they stay late to work on it, or they go home early to beat the traffic so they can work again at home. And I often have to tell people, no, leave your laptop, forget about it, because you need to take the rest in order to be truly productive. And going from a 40-hour week to 50-hour week to 60-hour week, you don't get more done, you get less done, and you feel worse for it. And so, the idea that maybe there might be some system that is personalized and unique and individual that can help you to be more productive while still being discreet is kind of actually quite interesting.
Yeah, and I wonder actually if that type of system could then gather that same data and be a reinforcing loop, that then now you're seeing how people are performing well and it reinforces that behavior.
Well, I think personally in a perfect world, there will be AI that's incorporated to similar what Amy's talking about to be more sensory-based environments. In Japan, they actually have changed the lighting in their subway system because it's the highest suicide rate on certain days, and it's like 30% of people are jumping in front of these trains, and so they actually used the computers to change the lighting and create this really romantic mood with the music to make it more sort of like built upon relaxing environment. But maybe that could happen in the workplace where, quite frankly, if you come in and you're having a bad day and that AI can automatically detect that and create an environment that's more either forgiving or more pumping you up, that would be a fantastic way to come to work. So can you guys design that?
We're on it. We're going to ask Alex to help.
Yeah, and it can start in the Uber on the way to work.
Yeah,
right? There we go. All you got to do is link your accounts. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. It's been a really great conversation. I want to make sure we give everyone a chance to get that one thing you've been dying to say this whole time. So, Aymee, do you want to kick us off, and we'll work back this way this time?
Well, I brought a prop. This is Fortune Magazine, November issue, called 25 Ways Artificial Intelligence is Changing Business. And I thought it was very practical in all of the examples that it was given. So I recommend, if you're interested in this topic, this is a great reading. And also, if you want to talk to me further, you can visit my website, happinessforhumankind.com, and I'm happy to chat outside of this. Thanks. Happy to be here.
I guess I would say, especially given the context of the discussion around some of the fear aspects of artificial intelligence, is I think a more useful analogy is to think about the way that we interact with robots. And you might have this science fiction version of a robot in your mind, something like an android that can go anywhere, do anything. The Terminator maybe comes to mind. But we deal with robots all day long, right? They're just super mundane, like our washing machine or our dishwasher. Maybe you have a Roomba. Like these are single-purpose robots that are good at one thing, or they're kind of good at one thing. And the way to think about artificial intelligence is the same. You might imagine HAL from 2001: A Space Odyssey But the reality is we deal with single-purpose artificial intelligences all day long. Most of you probably dealt with one today on the keyboard of your phone, right? It is an artificial intelligence that is suggesting the next word for you to use. And I think that is a much more positive way of thinking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, much more useful. And hopefully that means you can envision better applications for this coming revolution.
Interesting. Yeah, I think one of the key points that I had in my mind today was about taking the step back and not trying to optimize the current thing you're doing, trying to take the big picture view, and I already kind of mentioned it. But I guess it's something that everyone can do in their daily life as they're trying to think about, you're trying to get one task achieved, but if you try and step back and look at the bigger picture of what's the whole big picture, when we talk about buildings, talk about life cycle from through design to refitting, to retirement or demolition, and try and think of that and then look at other systems as well. People get very focused on specific stuff about like the self-driving vehicle and is it going to, cause more accidents or less accidents? How's it going to pick, in case there's somebody in front of the car? But if you look at the bigger picture of transportation and how autonomous transportation can change lives and for, and think about, like I was talking about with the people who are disabled or immobile and how they will get around, and how that could change their life if they actually are a lot more mobile. I mean, here in San Francisco and the Bay Area in general, people are talking about traffic and housing prices, and you're like, well, if everyone had a lot more mobility and you could work or sleep while you're traveling in a comfortable environment, it might actually solve other problems. So we tend to focus, on very specific small issues, but taking a bigger picture view might help people kind of change their mind and think about actually this could be a good thing and how it might actually be a benefit for everybody.
And yeah, I think that, moving forward, you guys in the design world are actually in the perfect position, in my personal opinion, because creativity and innovation is more powerful than it's ever been, because that's the thing that differentiates us from AI and from the robots. Because if you asked, Siri today to, come up with something on her own, she can't, because she's only programmed so far, to interact. And she'll tend to send you straight to a web link for a dictionary quote, because that's just a straight, she's a black and white algorithm. And we as humans live in the gray. And I think that, creativity and innovation and, connectivity are the future more so than ever, because we can become either super disconnected and rely heavily on the technology, or we can continue to evolve as we've always done as humans and become bigger and better and allow AI to sort of boost us up to the next level.
That's a nice way to end. I think we solved it. So I want to thank again everyone. Really appreciate the time. Very interesting conversation. It's really interesting to see the different takes on it, all very thoughtful and thought-provoking. And thanks to everyone from here. Appreciate the time.